Hello, everybody. My name is Carsten. I would like to talk about our approach of applying tenant-specific configuration, a runtime configuration to our microservice architecture. Before going into detail, I would like to shortly describe the setting so that you are able to follow me during the talk. The company I work with is called Kluwer. It's a very big global information service provider that bought the startup called Smartlaw.de about 3 or 4 years ago. Smartlaw is basically an online Legaltech service for document generation. So we're able to generate 100 or 150 legal documents that are up to date in a personalized interview process. You're able to manage these documents afterwards. Of course, you can be informed about alerts and notifications if law changes or something similar. And you can also have access to legal information. Although I'm the only person in business outfit today, apparently I'm working with the DevOps team that manages the Smartlaw application. And we decided to switch to microservice about 2 years ago. The main goal was to enable some sort of white labeling. So to have the same software bases and serve multiple tenants. So multi-tenancy was our starting point. We wanted to have different tenants here in this example, tenant A and tenant B, with different layout, different content, different process also features. But not only the user interface should look similar and different, but also the customer journey, meaning the flow that the user takes through the application. In the first example, the user selects a document like a living will, working contract, rental contract, something similar, then go through the interview with personalized question, have the document generated, have a preview, but then has to register himself, go through a checkout, and afterwards he's able to download the document and manage it. In the second example, the tenant B, there's no need for registration. The user just selects document, go through interview, downloads it, and that's it. This was our starting point, and then we derived the requirements for our tenant configuration to be able to configure these kind of things at runtime. So the first point was to enable, of course, multiple tenants in the same environment on a per request basis. So every request should be able to go through a different tenant depending on the requested context. So we wanted to steer different layouts, the contents, customer journey, as I talked about, also selection of databases, and even activation or deactivation of features. We also wanted to enable a very fine-grained approach in our service environment because we have different sizes of services, of course, and also we wanted to have some parts of the service be configurable. Of course, the services should be configurable at runtime, so there shouldn't be any need to restart the service if the configuration changes or similar. And we wanted to have some sort of configuration management, some support of profile for partial overwriting, as I said before, and some sort of versioning and change tracking. Which also fitted into our microservice architecture was the seamless removal, adding, and removal of service configuration based on the services that are available in our service environment. And the last point here, I put it in brackets, the support of the non-technical user product owner was something we started with, but in the meantime, we switched to a more technical view on the configuration, but that's what I will talk about at the end of the talk. So this is basically how the approach integrated into our microservice environment. We have microservices here like user management, dashboard, document generation. That's the size of the microservice we use in our application. And the tenant configuration is just another service in the environment. Each service comes as a schema. In our approach, it's a JSON schema which we apply here and has dedicated data for each of the tenants. Tenant A has data, tenant B has another data for each of the services here. Of course, there are some system-wide configurations that are also handled in this way. Another important point which can be taken from this slide here is that the tenant configuration uses some sort of activation pattern to decide what kind of application or what kind of data to serve for the particular request. So if a particular activation pattern applies, then the respective tenant configuration is returned to the client. So this is an example here, a very basic example, the host name that is used here. We do not only apply this kind of tenant configuration for different applications, but also to different stages in our environment. So the test, staging, and production environment have different tenants. And that's why we are able to distinguish here between the stages by means of the host name. The second screenshot here depicts our graphical user interface that we wrote. As I said, we originally wanted to support non-technical users like the product owner for managing service configurations here. And this screenshot depicts what you see if you're entering tenant configuration, what kind of services are currently there, what kind of configurations can I manage. If you click on one of the entries here, you're taken forward to the configuration page for one service. And if you go from top to bottom here, you see that on the top there's a tenant and the version, the name of the service that you're actually trying to configure. As I said earlier, the profile, in this sense, it's in English profile because we are managing also HTML snippets, which may be language specific. And that's why it's important to have some sort of profile that partly overrides the base configuration here. Then you can see the JSON schema, of course, and configure the actual configuration data. In this example, this is our customer journey configuration. We are using some kind of event mechanism and define the translations or the transitions between one service to another service by means of the URL, the source, and an expression that is evaluated. We also applied some sort of tenant properties to be more, to do not rely on a particular environment here, because if you want to switch one or copy one configuration from test environment to staging, then maybe only the URL changes, and that's why we applied some properties to be able to copy the whole configuration, and only the properties are environment specific here. It's possible to validate the configuration data against the JSON schema. And this is our approach to some sort of versioning or change management. There's a connection to a Git repository that is used to store the current configuration, and you're able to load it into this application here. If we move from the graphical user interface to the retrieval side of the service, this is a very basic illustration how it works. If the client on the left side requests some resource with a given context, the gateway, which is a reverse proxy like realized by Zool or something, extracts the context and then forwards the resource request to the respective service with the context on the request. Then the service is able to forward the request to the tenant configuration, and based on the application, the activation pattern and the currently given context, returns the configuration. In this example, it's the connection to a particular service, third-party service, which should be used to retrieve the data that we want to have. Then the request is forwarded to the suitable service and returned to the client immediately. This was only a very short insight into our application because of the lightning talk setup. I want to have some conclusion at the end. The challenges, most important challenges that we have to face, of course, are configuration migration and comparison, meaning how to evaluate if the whole configuration is valid, not only the service part, but only the whole system, and also testing and verification of the whole configuration. Some means that we apply is, of course, acceptance testing, like seeing if the customer journey in the front end still works for all the important cases, and, of course, the tenant property idea to enable some sort of migration from one stage to another. Another challenge was the mixture of formats, because we apply JSON for configuration, as I said, but also have the configuration for HTML snippets like marketing widgets, email templates, or these kind of things. And it was very difficult to maintain this kind of data because of the mixture of JSON and HTML. What you can do here is basically maybe make a step further into abstraction and write YAML files that have the JSON part abstracted and the HTML inside, so that you have some interpreting script that generates the configuration that you're finally putting into the configuration interface. What was also difficult, or is difficult to achieve, is alignment of suitable service versions if you use versions for your services, and the configuration, so that they match. And one clue or one conclusion that we had is that, of course, services should contribute their own configuration. So if they are discovered, or if they come into the environment, they provide the information with them, so that so it's possible to have some alignment between the different versions. This, of course, somehow conflicted with the original goal that we had, meaning the support of the product owner, which needs a very easy interface with forms where you can input some configuration data. And as I said earlier, we finally switched towards JSON configuration, as it seemed to be difficult to achieve, because some configuration are very, of course, technical. You have to understand what kind of other things are affected if you change this kind of configuration, and it turned out to be not that practical, at least in our environment. This was my talk about our approach. Thank you very much. If you have further questions, we can do it right now, or you can approach my colleagues or me after the talk. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions?
How many tenants and how do you really test that?
We have currently the different stages: dev, test, production, tenants, which are also tenants here, and 3 or 4 tenants, different tenants that are configured differently. And the testing is, of course, a very difficult thing. As I said earlier, the easiest approach is to have the testing at the acceptance tests at the front end part, just to have Selenium tests that running through, checking if the customer journeys are working, and other things are, of course, user tests. Or if you have something that is not against the schema, you can also test against the schema.
Was it actually worth it, like for 4 tenants to build the whole, the framework configuration system? Like I think it was very challenging, and you made it, and it's like super awesome, but.
That's a very good question. Yeah, as I said earlier, we started from the goal to support the product owner, very non-technical user with graphic user interface. That's what turned out to be not the most practical thing, but nowadays we think that it was worth it, the effort, because now it's very many things can be solved by just going into the tenant configuration, changing something, and after a short caching period, it immediately changes in the front end. So it's very luxurious, so to say. So if you don't really need it, it's maybe not worth the effort. But if you have very changing environments where you want to change something very fast, then it's for us a good approach.